Welcome to episode 134 of the Women of the Military podcast. This week my guest is Penny Lee Deere. Penny began her military service in the Women Army Corps and served in Desert Storm/Desert Shield. Her career spanned 20 years from 1975 to 1995. In this interview, we talked about her experience in the military and how it started in the Women's Army Corps and then how things changed when she became part of the U.S. Army in 1978. She talked about being a single mom during Desert Storm and living in Germany and how they had a plan for what happened when she got activated to deploy and her kids flew home to stay with her parents. She also talked about her work she is doing now as a veteran. She credits the arts as saving her life. She is a multimedia artist, writer, and photographer. She is a licensed massage therapist and uses alternative therapy in her own path of recovery and sharing these benefits with others on her website, mindbodysoulbypenny.com. This is a great interview because it covers a lot of different aspects of military history that often aren't talked about. So I really hope you enjoy this interview, and let's get started. Thank you, Blue Star Families, for sponsoring this week's episode of Women of the Military podcast. The Blue Star Families 2021 Military Family Lifestyle Survey is open through June 6th. Help Blue Star families show what military, veteran, and National Guard Reserve families like yours need to thrive. The stories and information shared become the fuel and information leaders need to help create change that will directly benefit us and our families. For instance, those who took the Military Family Lifestyle Survey last year had an opportunity to share details about the ramifications and impacts the pandemic had on them, their jobs, their children's education, etc. The feedback was extensive and eye-opening, and has given a first-hand perspective of how military families were affected by the pandemic. Visit bluestarfam.org/survey2021 to learn more and to take the survey. Now let's start listening to this week's interview with Jody Allen. Welcome to the show, Penny. I'm excited to have you here.
Hello there. I'm glad to be here this morning.
So let's start with, why did you decide to join the military?
Well, there's actually a couple of reasons. I grew up in upstate New York, and it was a very small town. And I was actually told that I wasn't really college material. So I was going to business school. That was the only two options at the time in 1975. And so the other thing was, say, if during that time frame, if you were actually, there was a lot of farming communities, and perhaps if I was to stay there, I might end up married to a farmer. And the selection was, there's only 36 people in our graduating class. And I didn't necessarily see any potential in those people to marry and have 10 children and look like an old lady by the time I'm 39. So, but the other thing is, I kind of wanted to join the Peace Corps, and I'm not sure why I didn't. So I looked into the Marine Corps, and I basically, because I like their uniforms, very smart looking and whatever. Then I said, you're not strong enough to be a Marine. You better go in the Army. So I still do this talking to myself and talking myself out of it all the time. So, anyway, so I was hoping that there was something more other than my little town. So I wanted to see the world basically and do some traveling. And, that's, and the other thing, once I decided that this would be my choice, I knew when I left at 19 that I would not be back for 20 years. That's what I set out to do, and that's what I did. I retired at 39.
So you knew from the beginning that you were going to stay in for the 20 years?
Yes, correct.
So you ended up joining the Army, and what was basic training like?
Well, actually, my Army was the Women's Army Corps. So during that time frame, it was completely segregated. We were women only. And I went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. So back during that time period, right at the end of the Vietnam era, you were not allowed to be married. If you had children, you actually had to relinquish their guardianship while you were gone, at least. And you weren't allowed to be pregnant for sure. That would be a dishonorable discharge. And you weren't allowed to have children. So back to basic training, Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And so we were Women's Army Corps, and we were one of the first women to have a male drill sergeant. They were trying to transition us into the regular Army. And the way they started was having our drill sergeant be a male. And it worked out good. It was totally different than, like, we could see other platoons that had the women drill sergeants, and they looked mean to me. You know what I mean? But I was glad I had Sergeant Gates, actually. So I tell a cute little story that if we were doing well, we were sweet peas. And if we weren't doing our best, or we had to do push-ups or whatever, we were hamburger heads. So, you know, all the cursing and going on that people have since done, we didn't have to put up with. It's also a very different atmosphere. We were basically young ladies. We were either in the admin field or nurses. We were always in dress uniform. Yes, we went to the range. Yes, we fired our weapons. We did all those kind of things. Only there was like etiquette classes, and there was a proper way of, like, if you were to, there was standards, high standards, and you were a young lady. And so I think the basic training was 8 weeks. Let me think what else I want to say about it. We did women's push-ups, meaning we were on our knees, and then we only did the other. Now that would all change. The Women's Army Corps was disbanded in 1978. So 3 years I was Women's Army Corps, and then they actually gave me the option of getting out because my contract was for Women's Army Corps, and I became part of the United States Army. And so they gave me an option of getting out, or changing my contract, or getting out if I wanted to. And this will come into play again when I get married. They offered to let me out. They offered again because they didn't know what to do with us, truthfully. We weren't allowed to be married. Now we are. We weren't allowed to have children. Now we are. So every time they had to change the contract or give me an option of getting out. So I said, what's the matter with you people? Don't you want me here?
So the first 3 years you were in the Women's Army Corps.
Correct.
And then they disbanded that, and then you decided to join the Army and extend your time. What was the main difference between being in the Women's Army Corps and being in the Army? Or was it just a title thing that made a difference?
No, it makes a big difference. Well, like I said, now you can have children, you can get married, you were treated equally. No more women push-ups. There were men push-ups. So you had the same exact standards. We actually, when they first did this, we were in co-ed dorms. So for instance, my first duty station, we'll go back to AIT, but my first duty station was 1st Armored Division. That's tanks. Okay. So women, and that period, we weren't driving tanks, but I worked for the post office and the 1st Armored Division. So there was one wing of our building. So there was 20 females for however many. I really should look this up. I tell the story. About 10,000 men. Okay. But there was only 20 of us in one wing, but we were really co-ed. The whole barracks was all men. Literally, like, we were walking down the hall to take the showers, and they're right there too, you know. It's totally different from what I signed up for, so to speak. So anyway, I just became one of the team, just as you would talk to any other, you know, the recent soldiers or whatever. And they progressed. Everything's steadily, you know, more fields are opening up now. So when I first joined, I was in the post office. So my advanced training was at Fort Benjamin Harrison, Indiana. And that's where my postal school was. And so the interesting thing about that is if I was overseas, and I spent a lot of time overseas out of my 12 out of 20 years was overseas. And if I was overseas, I worked at the post office because they have their own Army post offices. But if I was stateside, I became an admin kind of person, admin specialist. But I had an identifier as the postal clerk. So, you had your regular job and then you took care of the mail. So that kind of breaks it up, that you're not doing the same thing over and over again. And I did that for 10 years, and then I switched to military intelligence.
So let's talk about the 10 years that you were doing the post office duties. And were there any memories or challenges from that first 10 years? I think it's really interesting that you were there during the switch.
Not only that, I was there during my career. I went from the end of Vietnam during the Cold War. I watched all the Soviet Union disbanded. I'm kind of like a living fossil. And then I went to Desert Storm, and so I think I have an interesting story. Okay, so back to the post office. So the first one is Ansbach, Germany. It was the headquarters for 1st Armored Division. The interesting thing about being in the post office was by the time I was done with my first 10 years, I had the same designation as a postmaster. By the time I could run every aspect of a post office. And back then in Germany, everything was paid by money order. So, and you went to pay call, like you had to actually go and see the officer to get paid that day. And then they all came to the post office to pay their bills, the J.C. Penney bill, everything, their rent, everything. And so I did thousands and thousands of money orders, like $10,000 a day during the payday. And then I don't know if they still do it, but we got paid twice a month. Some people could do mid-month. And so anyway, so that's a very busy time of the year. The other thing is in Germany, it's very popular you can get, back then, it was very cheap to buy electronic equipment, like Bose speakers that were huge, that would normally cost you thousands and thousands of dollars. You could buy them tax-free in the PX, and they would ship them home. So that was, a lot of stuff like that. But, and then the cuckoo clocks, things like that. So basically is the post office is very important, at least back then, to get communications back and forth to folks. And my mind really works in a very strange way. I could probably tell you the zip codes of the things I used to pitch mail in 1975. It's strange. Like, who cares, right? But anyway.
But it was your job, and you memorized it and you know it. And so, yeah, that's really interesting. I think sometimes we forget how much technology's changed in such a short period of time, and how the post office was critical, especially when you were overseas. And now I think the post office is still critical when you're overseas more than stateside, but you have electronic banking and a lot of different things that make it a different experience.
Yeah, if you got care packages, it would take 3 or 4 weeks to get there because it came by boat, that kind of thing. Your cookies are stale by the time you get them, things like that.
Yeah, technology has changed so much. It's so crazy. So why did you decide to switch from being a postman to doing intel?
Basically, I couldn't get promoted. I was at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, which is the home of the Intel school. And I was much older, and I was putting together their promotion packets for these intelligence folks. And I was getting them promoted because I knew how to, put everything together for them. And I said, this is pretty stupid. And the reason I wasn't getting promoted is it has to do with supply and demand. They had enough post office people, or they had enough admin people. And so you had to wait for scores to drop, and they rarely did. So So the idea was for me to transfer, and then I would automatically get promoted because I changed to intelligence. Interesting enough, the scores dropped while I was in intelligence school, and I actually got promoted as a admin specialist. So anyway,
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. But it needed to be done because you would come to a point in the Army that if you didn't make a certain rank, they would kick you out. And it wasn't my fault. It was almost like a forced, you better do this or you're not going to be able to stay in kind of thing. And I was right at Fort Huachuca, so I just went to school right there.
Yeah. So you were like, I'm already here. This job sounds interesting and I'll get promoted.
The hardest part I have with switching over was because the folks that I was in charge of because of my rank knew more than I did because they had been in the field for, say, 3 or 4 years. And then as long as I was doing management stuff, but if I had to figure out what was on the battlefield, I was a little, I had to catch up fast.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so you knew the management side because that's what you had been doing, but then all the intel ins and outs of the job, you didn't have that time to learn the hands-on, and you were kind of put. Yeah, that makes sense. So you worked really hard and were able to get caught up to speed. And what were you doing as a military intelligence operative? Is it operative?
What it was an intelligence analyst, and so I took all the information and put it like a puzzle together. So different forms of intelligence provide information to me, and then based on that, I figure out what's really going on. So in my case, I told you I was part of the Cold War. So our job was, I was located in Stuttgart, Germany, and we would watch the Soviets were actually stationed in Czechoslovakia at the time, East Germany, Poland. They were all, the Soviets were still there from World War II, where they occupied it and they stayed there, right? But anyway, so with solidarity, and they first took Poland was the first to declare democracy and declare their rights. So the Soviets finally moved out of there, and then it was like a domino effect where all the Warsaw Pacts, ended up disbanding. And then, of course, it was back to, this is part of your history for the little people, right? USSR. So it was Mother Russia, but there was 19 other satellites, Belarus and Ukraine. There was all kinds of other countries, USSR, United Soviet Socialist Republic. So they're all communists. But anyway, they would steadily break off too. So now we talk about Russia, but Russia is only one country of what it used to be with the so my job was to watch them disband. And when they said that they were going to dismantle like nuclear weapons or all these delivery systems that, for instance, a perfect example was a tank. They took off the turret of the tank and made it a tractor. So one of our jobs was, at some point, do they put the turrets back on and now you have a tank again? So it was our job to watch, make sure, or if they're playing war games, are they really playing war games or are they trying to build up? And so what I find very interesting now is it's hard to turn off. I've been retired for like 25 years. And when I see things happening, I would say something like, we really need to be looking at this little training exercise here, things like that. So it was interesting time.
Yeah, because you were programmed to think that way. And
I was there when the fall of the wall in 1989. And then they switched the enemy on me, just like that. So that had all happened. But in 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait. And then we went to Desert Storm and Desert Shield. So interesting story. The hip behind is a Soviet helicopter. Okay. So that's foe. You got friendly and foes, right? So we're taught that a hip is a bad helicopter. Well, I'm over in Desert Storm, Desert Shield, and we have these big berms, these pile of dirt, and a hip comes across the berm. Well, the Soviets had sold it to the Egyptians. So don't shoot down that hip. They really literally changed everything on me. And the terrain, for instance, I'm in upstate New York, and Germany is a lot like that, very green, where you go to the desert, there's nothing there. It's sand. There's no tree. There's no terrain. It's like you have to shoot at azimuth just to know where you're going and hope that you get there, to include the toilet. You shoot at azimuth to go to the toilet.
Yeah, there is nothing out there. It's hot. There's sand everywhere. So let's talk about your deployment. How did you get activated to deploy? Not activated as in like National Guard, but like how did that process go when you found out you were going to go to Iraq and all that stuff that happened?
Well, the first thing we did was, being in intelligence, we knew immediately that Kuwait had been invaded, and I want to say August. And so basically we got notification that we would be deploying or get ready to deploy. And so we would go to a briefing, and then we had to learn all about how their culture is different. That when we first got there, we weren't allowed to drive. They wanted us to wear that, I don't know, covering. I forget what it's called. But anyway, they literally wanted the female soldiers to be covered up and not for us to drive our own vehicles. And the military, DOD, had to tell them this is their soldiers, So there was a lot of prep. You had to, but one of the things in training is you prepare for it at all the time. Like you really have a go bag at any time. So you might go to work one day, and we did alerts in Germany where literally when you dropped your kids off at the babysitter, you really didn't know if you were getting on a plane or not. We prepped for it, I guess. So the kinds of things that were already in place was, we had privately owned vehicles. So they knew that it was supposed to be shipped back to the States. Or your children, there was already power of attorneys in place and what was supposed to happen to those children. So we had trained for it all, and it all got implemented. So my two children, 4 and 7 years old, went to my mother's house in upstate New York from November till I left in May, and then they finished up their school year, and then we got them back to a system. And after Desert Storm, it turned out that 7th Corps headquarters is where I worked in Stuttgart, and because they were starting to downsize, so we literally closed up the barracks. That was my job before we left, and swept it all out and gave it back to the Germans that we had taken from them back in 1945. So it's a circle, a huge circle.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, so you guys you found out in like August the invasion happened, and then
I was there by Thanksgiving.
And you guys started to like practice, which is what the military does. You had all the paperwork and all the. And were you married at the time?
A single parent. Yeah. Which that's really tough to do in the service. Dropping the kids off at daycare at all kinds of hours. And that's actually how I don't know at what point you want to talk about that, but I actually opened a daycare for military folks, because when you drop off the children on post, 6 o'clock in the morning is the earliest, and you have to pick them up by 6 p.m. Well, the Army doesn't work like that. So I literally, when I got out of the service, I opened a daycare 24 hours to accommodate them.
Yeah, that is an important aspect that I don't think people realize, like, especially with exercises and ramping and all that stuff, there is no 9 to 5. And I recently talked to someone, and she was talking about how now that she's a mom, she has a lot more empathy for the the parents that she had, who she was a young lieutenant, and she was like, what do you mean you have to go get your kids? And like a lot of dual military or single parent families, and like how they have to try and work around the limitations of the child care.
I paid an astronomical amount of money on daycare. Not that they didn't deserve it, but you have a child for 24 hours. Yep. So anyway, that's what I did when I got back.
So your kids went back home, back to the States. How did they get to the States from Germany?
At the time, you could fly unaccompanied. So she was 4. She must have they might have made special arrangements because of the war. But my son had been flying back. He used to spend the summers with my so it was kind of like just another one. We just stayed longer. But so they did unaccompanied. I would be scared to death to do that now, to send your kid unaccompanied on an airplane. But they did. Yep. So like the stewardesses kind of keep track of them, and they picked him up from, yeah.
That's crazy.
Yes.
That's crazy.
I agree.
That's crazy. But that's so cool that like everything was planned out, even to the like detail of like, if mom doesn't get you, you're going to the airport and going to grandma and grandpa's.
Right. So an interesting story that I remember from my daughters. Now remember, we don't have cell phones. So my son and daughter are watching on the TV that the war is over in February, right? It was 6 weeks long, and then the airstrike, 3 days of ground war, and then it was all over. So my daughter, I finally got to, it was a Mars system, like some kind of electronic, you got on a radio and they connected you somehow, like a CB radio kind of thing. But anyway, I talked to her, and she said, Mom, the war is over. When are you coming home? Well, I never came home until May. So it was first in, first out. So the Marines were there first. They got to get home first, things like that. So how do you tell a 4-year-old? She didn't understand that, one of the neat things I have is my mother made them at the time write in journals. That's how they wrote to me. They wrote in a journal where the letter really didn't come to me at the time, but I have it now. I have their little handwritings, and I have their stories of everyday stuff. One of the things they did do is we both did those little cassette players that kind of looks like a phone now, but they're little cassette players. And so they could talk to me. Like it might be 3 or 4 weeks old, but I hear their little voices, and vice versa. I would send it back. And the neat thing about that is my parents would share these tapes with other, like the people in the hometown. So they knew what it was like sitting in a berm at night with guard duty and living it with me. Like I was, so.
That's really cool history, especially the letters from your children in a journal. That is so cool. And I don't know if you know that April is the month of the military child. You should totally write about that or share it somehow.
That's a good idea. I also have, so I would write people back and forth, friends and stuff. They saved my letters and gave them back to me like 20, 25 years later. I was like, who would have thought, right?
That's interesting. I have all my letters that I got when I was deployed, but no one's ever given me, except for my husband. I have all the letters I sent him, and so I actually have one on my desk right now. So
yep. So I have the postcards that I sent my kids. My parents have since died, and I got them all. So it's very cool.
That is really cool. That's like really cool history. That's amazing. Yeah. That's just really fascinating. It would be so cool to hear from like a 4 and 7-year-old whose mom's overseas and what they think. And I think there's a lot of stuff that adults do for the month of the military child, and sometimes we forget about like the kids have stories too, and
well, my daughter is 30 something. This is terrible. She was born in 84, whatever that makes her. And okay, so she has a 3-year-old now, but she was in the Army. She married an Air Force, and she got out because she wanted to have children and she didn't want to leave them behind. So it does affect them. But it's interesting to hear her perspective on what she thought or her perception of how things were or my perceptions, and they definitely don't match it. Or she'll tell me how something hurt her and I didn't even get the idea that it was even a concern. Or I'm thoroughly exhausted, right, from work, and then I just want to collapse. And so who's really playing mommy here,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that sounds really interesting. So you guys finally got reunited and you were closing up the base because the Army was downsizing with the end of the war. And then did you come back to the States to finish out your last few years?
Yes. So I did 12 years in Germany out of 20 in 4 different locations. It wasn't all at once. And then 4 different places in the States, and Desert Storm was Saudi Arabia. So let me see, when I came back, by that time I'd already been to Fort Belvoir, Virginia. That's where I had my first son. And then I went to Germany and then back to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. And then this is interesting. So it was the 513th MI Brigade, and the whole brigade packed up. So 1,000 people moved to Fort Gordon, Georgia. We kind of invaded Augusta, Georgia, the whole brigade. So all these people, we had to find housing and all the family members and stuff like that. So that's unusual for the whole unit to go. So, yeah.
Yeah. Talk about a housing crisis. They're like, there's no houses. All these people.
Yeah. They had to build a lot. Yeah. Let me see. So I've been at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, Fort Belvoir, Virginia. And I lived right outside of Quantico in Dumfries. And I think that's 4 places, right? Yeah. And then Stuttgart, Pirmasens, Zweibrücken, and Ansbach, Germany. And the desert.
And the desert.
Close to Hafer-Abad.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's so crazy. That's such a cool, I just think it's so cool because I don't get to talk to a lot of Desert Storm veterans about their experience, and the fact that your time went from the WAC to the regular Army through the Cold War and then Desert Storm that's a really cool history of time where a lot of people think it's like, oh, it's just peacetime, but it wasn't even close to peacetime.
No.
It was a different type of...
I got out in 95, so 75 to 95. Yeah. So do you want to hear a little bit more about the desert, or?
Yeah, let's talk more about your deployment.
It's really hard to explain these berms. I want to say they're about 40 feet high. It's a pile of sand. And then you would put one berm inside of another berm inside of another berm. So it's kind of like and then you had this great big berm on the outside. So I would live in a tent in one of these facilities, that like and in one of the berms, but you had to find this hole to go through. Okay. And then if you didn't find, and then you'd have to go to my workstation, wherever that is. And I had a shift from noon to midnight. And like I told you, like when you went to the bathroom, you had to shoot an azimuth in order to find what you're looking for. The latrines where we actually burnt our own feces, that kind of thing. But anyway, so, and light discipline, you can't use any light. You just have to, hope that you find where you're going, to include going home. And so I spent, let me see. One of the things a story that I tell is something went wrong. I didn't find the right place to get into the next berm, and I would wander around, and it was getting to be like 4:00 in the morning. I got off at midnight, and I couldn't find my way home. And then I came across artillery. So I'm on the outside of the berm. They're the ones protecting us. I went, oh, this is nuts. I'm going to get myself killed out here because they're going to think I'm the enemy. But anyway, so I finally came to this tent, and I finally said, I'm just going to wait to daylight because I'm lost in my own facilities, right? So it wasn't until the cook came into the mess hall is where I ended up. I didn't know it. They turned the light on, and it's my own dining facility. I was like a stone's throw of where I'm supposed to be, but like, what's this lady doing? She's, they're ready to cook breakfast at 4:00 in the morning. But anyway, so I had another incident where I'm on guard duty, and so we're waiting for the bad guys. If there is a bad guy, we're waiting for them so light discipline is a real issue. And so we see these lights coming directly at us we're in our foxholes that are in these great big berms. And so then you have concertina wire on it, but these lights are coming towards us. And that doesn't even make sense. If it's the enemy, they wouldn't have lights on either, right? They're going to attack stealthily. Well, anyway, luckily I heard English, because I didn't light them up. But what they'd gotten diverted, and they had no idea that they were about to cross into the concertina wire, and I was about to, fire on them. And so it all worked out. We realized that they were good, and they figured out what they were doing. But it could have, friendly fire. It could have been disastrous. So, yeah.
That's crazy. So you guys had like giant berms to like protect from shrapnel, and then these little tiny holes to get through in different places, and it was like a maze.
It was like a maze, right. And in the daytime, it's no big deal, but
yeah, and doing it in total darkness where you can't see anything, and then you make a wrong turn, and then you're like totally off.
The sand gets into everything, to include your lungs, and you're basically sleeping where camels sleep, right? Very, very unhealthy. And are you familiar with the Gulf War syndrome? 1/3 of us are sick from the deployments with all kinds of different things. And I have done a number of research projects documenting it, not only for my own purposes, but to help other people. Social media has been fantastic because we all compare notes, but they have a research facility down in New Jersey, and I volunteer to be, they figure out, document different lung capacities and sleeping, and it's a whole gamut. Chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, and then what we can do about it. A lot of alternative therapies seem to be the best instead of medication, things like that. So,
yeah. So is that something that you've been involved in since you left the military, or was it in recent years?
It was well after I got out in 95, and I never went to the VA until 2003. I wanted nothing to do with the village. I didn't even identify as a veteran. It was just fairly common. But the only reason I did was I wasn't feeling well. I was having terrible nightmares. It was affecting me. And so I reached out for assistance. And then I got paying, how we never go on sick call. We never pay attention, just suck it up kind of thing. Well, I finally was paying attention to all that was going on with my body. And then I actually went to school for a massage to help me for me to help other veterans, and for me to better understand my body and what was going on with it. And that was very beneficial. And since then, I know a lot more about wellness and the alternatives, and I highly recommend it, that kind of thing. So, but it was basically to help myself get well, because I didn't want to be on a bunch of medications. That only masks the problem. And of course, suicide, what can we do to help that whole situation? So,
yeah, I found that meditation and essential oils really help me. Someone asked me, like, how do you sleep at night? And I was like, I do meditation, and I diffuse essential oils, and I have different essential oils based on my anxiety level, and
exactly,
it helps me sleep. And
we make our own. I've had a couple classes where we make our own potions, so to speak, blending different ones together for whatever's going on.
Yeah. So I found meditation. My mom told me about it, and she's like, I think you need to do this. And I was like, no. And then she sent me an article, and it was talking about how veterans with PTSD use meditation. And I was like, okay, maybe I'll actually do what you're suggesting. And it's been really helpful, just for me to be able to work through different things and to stop, and really healing. And then essential oils when my anxiety's through the roof. So I want to talk a little bit about what you're doing today. I mean, we talked a little bit about some of the things that you're doing, but what are you doing? You have a business that you're doing, and
so I am a licensed massage therapist. What I found was so I graduated in 2012 with that. And what I found was it was very taxing on my body, very demanding. And of course, I have all these issues anyway. And so so I've gravitated to cranial sacral massages, or something that's not so taxing on me. And I do very limited amount of massages currently. So, but what I do is, I facilitate a group called Arts for Vets. It's actually a committee within the American Legion, and it's Support Our Troops Committee, Arts for Vets, and it's here in Albany, New York, the Zaloga Post. How that happened was, we used to go to different therapies at the VA, and in 2016, they said that they're going back to a medical model where you only do 12 sessions and then you're dismissed. Well, in my case, I had been going to writing therapy, art therapy, music therapy, individual and group. And then I was actually part of the Vets of Albany choir and the bell choir where it goes chimes. Anyway, I would go 4 days a week. That was my place to be. And then all of a sudden they stopped it. And then it was really hard to take. In my case, I got mad. A lot of people just became recluses and didn't know what to do themselves, and literally ended up on, psych wards, things like that. Because if you had all this and then it's all gone. Well, anyway, so basically I got mad, and there was 2 other veterans that went, and we said, well, we're going to just start Arts for Vets, just like that. So then I said, well, Penny just can't start her own organization. How realistic is that? So what I did was I went to the American Legion looking for a room that we could hang out with, have coffee, right? Once a week. And so they said, by all means, that room's not being on Tuesday, come on, or Friday or whatever. Then they saw what we were doing, and then people started coming. And then they said, how about this? How about you become a committee within the American Legion, and it's a win-win. You have your support you need. You have your place and financial support, and then you are filling our task of support our troops. I guess every American Legion has a support the troop. So anyway, we are officially a committee, and we've grown. We have an annual art. At the Create Community Studios she actually is our art therapist, and because we lost that at the VA, so we still have a therapist, but we have these an annual. It's going to be our 5th one in November, and this year we actually branched out and we kind of did. Are you familiar with the creative arts at the VA? They have 5 categories. Well, we really. For this last year right before COVID, actually, we ended up doing open mics. We do a lot of writing. So we actually were on Zoom, and we would do little dramatizations. And anyway, we kind of broadened our horizons a little bit, all because of COVID. We figured out how to do stuff on Zoom. So indirectly, it's helped us. And the other thing I want to tell you is that the best thing that ever happened to me was getting kicked out of the VA, because it turned out to be what I needed. Like, I've got my own little tribe, I don't know, a platoon, whatever, that I'm giving back. And it's obviously needed. So, and now, right now, we are getting ready to send our art to the Women's Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. There is a Uniting Us is sponsoring, it's called Summer of Healing. And they're going to do 6-week segments, and part of our art will go there during that time frame. And they're picking it up. They're actually coming from Virginia to Albany and picking up our art. And we are thrilled.
Well, I'm excited. I live outside of DC, so you're going to have to tell me so I can go to the memorial. I already need to go to the memorial. I'm waiting for my vaccine.
We actually have art in Dulles Airport.
When I go flying someday in the future, I'll have to look for it, because that's the airport I fly out of. So that's really cool. Yeah. I think that's really cool. And I think I just did a cross stitch for my 4-year-old, because he was mad when he found his brothers. And so I finally did his baby cross stitch. And when I was doing it, I found such like a connection to doing this project. And I didn't really think about it until you were talking about the art and the creating and like using my hands to create something and how healing that was. And I didn't ever think about it. I just was trying to do something for my 4-year-old because he was mad when he found his brothers.
Well, they actually have an organization. It's called Help Heal Veterans, and they send you kits in the mail.
I'll have to put that in the show notes, and I'm going to check it out.
HHV.org, it's called.
HHV.org?
Yeah, you want me to email it to you?
Yeah.
Okay, and then Uniting Us is the one where the art is?
Yeah.
Will do. Yes, they actually send you periodically little craft kits.
That's awesome. Yeah. So, did we miss anything from your time in the military, from your career, or even as a veteran?
Anything? I try to be an advocate for women veterans with military sexual trauma. I speak for those people who are unable to speak for themselves at this time. One of the in Dulles, there's currently the Eyes of MST. One of those eyes are mine. I submitted them for somebody else. Cindy Hooker is the one that painted them, but I think it's phenomenal that my eyes are in Dulles Airport. But the other thing I just literally did was a video, which it says, the eyes are watching you, like I'm watching the predator now. And I've been told it's very powerful. It's like...
And send that to me so I can put that in the show notes so that people can look at that.
Sure. Yep. Let me see. Basically try to advocate and be a liaison.
Were you a victim of military sexual trauma? I was wondering, I was like, we don't need to talk about it unless you really want to, but I think that's great that you're able to give back and help, especially women who can't speak up for themselves.
There's one little thing I would say about this is one of the problems is reporting, right? So I would definitely encourage folks to report, even if they didn't during the time, do it now still. But one of the things I wanted to mention was, I guess a couple of things, is I didn't report it at the time. Okay. All I did was I went to another service member of the same rank as me and told him about it. And this is what he said. He thought he was supporting me, but this is what he said to me. He said, if you don't report it, you're going to find yourself upside down in a foxhole. I was on my way to war, and the enemy was inside the wire. So he planted the seed that I wasn't even safe. within my own perimeter, inside that berm, right? So he thought it was, it kind of was, it wasn't very helpful thinking about it. I didn't think about it at the time. It's when things years later, and so I ended up reporting it, and because we were military intelligence, you have to have security clearances, and the person that attacked me needed a security clearance, and when I told the story, he didn't get the security clearance, and so he couldn't stay in the field. So indirectly, I got my justice years later.
Yes, that's a powerful story of reporting it years in the future and having something happen, and just the more information that I think researchers have and the VA has about this issue, the more that they can work to help this and try and make changes, and hopefully things will get better, because there's a lot that needs to be changed. Yeah. So my last question is, what advice would you give to young women who are considering joining the military?
I would definitely recommend that they do. The biggest thing that just be aware of your surroundings. Always have buddies. Male or female, doesn't matter. Who's going to have your six? And that's in everyday life too, truthfully. It's a great career. Right? I've been retired for 25 years. I got out in 95. So 25 years, 26 years, right? I've been collecting a retirement for that long as I've been out. I was in for 20 and I've been retired for over 20. And so it's definitely worthwhile. And I loved it. I love I went all over. My children's traveled the world, that kind of thing. Yes, there's war. Yes, there's deployments. But I think that they are changing it. My daughter was in the service, and they actually are, for instance, TBI is a real problem right now. I understand they're actually giving you an MRI before you deploy to make sure that how it compares when you come back. And so that means that they're kind of expecting it, but it helps with claims, right? Things like that. Or they have the SHARP program where, she's told me, like the sergeant major would say, are you sure nobody's, doing anything inappropriate with you or something like that? So I definitely think there's strength in numbers. We need more women in the military, and by all means, whatever career they want to do it. Yeah. If they got the skills and, yeah.
I agree. There's a lot of good stuff happening for women in the military, and the more women we have, I think the more change that can take place.
One of the things real quick, I think is neat is because we ended up becoming a committee within the Zaloga Post. Normally, American Legions are older gentlemen, right? And so all of a sudden, this committee, we have this infiltration of women, because you have to be a member of an American Legion in order to be part of our group. So indirectly, we've gotten, they love it, the fact that all these females are joining the American Legion. So it was kind of like backdoor, a different way of getting in there. But yeah, I think that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's really cool. And
I guess I would encourage people to join the American Legion, or it doesn't have to be that. VFW, I just learned that if you are in the service, you can actually join while you're in the service. So you get credit for all the years of, like, say if you're in for 4 years, you're already a member of the American Legion. And that goes, I met somebody who'd been in the Legion for 75 years. And I'm looking at him like, there's no way. He's not 100. So I went over and asked him. He said, I joined when I was 17 years old, when I was in the service. And yeah. So
that's a good piece of advice. And yeah, I think women commonly walk away from the veteran community. And if we can get involved with the veteran community while we're still in, it means it's more likely that we'll stay in that community.
And it's really important because these organizations, fraternities or whatever, they help lobby. The numbers help lobby in Congress and the Senate for our rights.
Right.
So it's important.
It is. Yeah, and I did a series last year with Military Officers Association of America, and they talked about lobbying and what they do and how they work with the VFW and the American Legion and the veteran organizations. So if you're interested in learning more about what the lobbyists do on Capitol Hill for veterans, you can check out that episode, and I'll link to it in the show notes.
Awesome. Thank you. I would.
Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoy getting to hear your story and getting to hear the different experiences over your 20-year career. And I'm just so glad that we got connected.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode. I hope that it encouraged and inspired you. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Women of the Military on YouTube. And come back next week for another story of a woman veteran sharing her experience in the military.